Good afternoon. Welcome to this ASHA webinar series. Today's topic is protection of farmers' seed rights in India. And it's a very important topic. We will keep looking at a particular legislation that India has enacted called the Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act 2001 as the main reference point for this discussion on farmers' seed rights. And on an issue like this, we are, of course, confronted by very basic questions like is it true that human innovation will progress only if intellectual property rights are recorded legally? And is it possible to give such IP rights without them becoming privatized, monopolistic tools? And can we think about innovation being incentivized in other ways other than IP rights? And there are different schools of thinking on this, of course. And when it comes to vital resource like seed resources, there are very many views on this, including the fact that we should not be thinking about any intellectual property rights on seed and related resources. Be that as it may, um, just 1 second, sorry. Under WTO, when India signed on to the WTO and its many different agreements, there was a commitment that as a country, we will harmonize our national laws in line with those commitments at the WTO. And what we did in India was to amend the Patents Act, which was already there. And we tried to define very clearly what will be patentable and what will not be patentable. But even that is a source of confusion at this point of time when it comes to genetic material. And there is a court case, a high profile court case going on that. And we also came up with our own legislation called the Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act, using a sui generis clause under the TRIPS. And in the PPV&FR Act, one set of people felt excited about registering farmers' varieties in the hope that it will prevent biopiracy. They were not doing it because they wanted exclusive rights or some farmers' communities were seeking exclusive rights, but it was seen as a tool to prevent biopiracy. And another set of people were concerned about seeds which were always open source in the Indian farming communities becoming privately owned, even if they were owned by a group of farmers and if not an individual farmers. So one set of issues were around farmers' varieties where communities were and have been custodians of seeds for generations. Then there's the issue of farmers as consumers of seed. Whatever the category of the seed variety might be, it could be a newly bred seed variety, or it could be traditional farmers variety. It could be from the public sector, it could be from the private sector, it could be extant farmers varieties. But whether rights of farmers as consumers will be upheld and protected as given in a particular overarching provision, section 39(1)(4) of this act. And the real test for this came last year when PepsiCo, this MNC, infamous for many things, but when it also became infamous for suing some Gujarat farmers, some potato farmers, alleging that they were infringements on its breeder rights. Meanwhile, there's also a constant pressure on India to weaken even its PPV and FR law with all the critiques that exist around it and push India towards more rigid seed IPRs. It is against this background that this webinar is being organized. I would like to begin by thanking all our panelists today and also informing the participants that one of our speakers is unable to join us. He's had to go to a hospital in relation to a health emergency of someone else, and he sends his regrets. And this is the first time that we are missing a speaker in any of our webinars, but that's COVID times for you, I guess. We have a lot of experience, expertise, and wisdom packed into this panel. We have Dr. Suman Sahai of Gene Campaign, who will talk about the genesis of the Act. And she remains as one of the unnamed architects of the Act itself that we have in India. Dr. R.C. Agrawal, who is not joining us, would have talked about farmers' rights provisions contained in the Act. His presentation is uploaded on our website, and one of my colleagues will share the link of the presentation in the chat box. Then we have Shalini Bhutani, a known legal researcher, and she's an analyst who's been writing extensively around seed rights of farmers. And she will address the question of whether the PPV&FR Act really is the farmers' rights law or not. And we have Kapil Bhai Shah of Jatan from Baroda. He will talk about the lessons thrown up specifically by the PepsiCo episode from Gujarat. And he's also a part of ASHA, and he was important part of OFI in the past. And Kapil Bhai Shah will look at lessons from the PepsiCo episode. And finally, for all those groups that have been trying to revive traditional land races and folk varieties, and for all the issues that the law poses with regard to that, and what might be the way forward, we have Dr. K.S. Varaprasad, who retired as the director of Indian Institute of Oilseeds Research, which is an ICAR institute, and is right now also the convener of a working group on seed systems in the RRA network, where he and others have been trying to systematically address the various techno-legal issues that prevent revival of traditional land races in formal seed systems and in various schemes of the government. Speaker intros are available on the web link that is being shared in the chat box. I also request participants to try and flash the social media live streaming links that are appearing in the chat box so that more people can watch this. If you can just take a few seconds to go to your social media pages and share the link there, that would help. And the presentations will be in English, followed by brief translations in Hindi by our friend Ishtiyaq Ahmed, who's been helping in various webinars, as you know. And we expect this session to run for nearly 2 hours. And we hope that you will settle down and participate fully in this. We will disable the chat for a while, but then open it as soon as good conversations are possible. We'll start the session now. I invite Dr. Suman Sahai to make her presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Kavita, and hello, everybody. Let me give you a little flavor of how this legislation came into being. This was really a consequence of the WTO TRIPS, which in the 1986 Uruguay round posed the question of intellectual property rights on plant material, plant varieties, etc. At the same time, globally, there was this whole conflict developing and a lot of people asking questions about IPR and the CBD as a counterforce, so to speak, as the Convention on Biological Diversity, which was acknowledging the rights of local people, farmers, indigenous people over genetic materials, over plant varieties that had been created, over land races, etc. So there were two pressures and two pulls and counterpulls. However, most governments, including our own, had at the beginning of the negotiations taken a position in favor of patenting of seeds. And this was at the time when the Dunkel draft was the penultimate draft at that time in the early 90s, which presented the solution to the TRIPS conundrum, and most countries were presented with the option of patenting, with a subtext saying there was also a sui generis option. The Indian government, as I said, had opted for patenting of seeds, and the Congress government of that time, I mean, I'm keeping politics out of this, but just the fact of the chronology, had thought that that was a better way because of the inputs that they were getting. It was at this time that Gene Campaign became very active in pushing for the sui generis legislation and saying that patenting was not an option. There was a big conflict at that time with the government, and the Gene Campaign was on a collision course, but I must hand it to them and acknowledge the fact that the government was very open to discussing. And I remember at that time the Prime Minister asking us this question: why are you so angry about the Dunkel draft and what is wrong? I'm only emphasizing this to say that it is very important to have a consultative process, which is at the moment quite dormant, unfortunately. But this consultative process with the government can lead to situations which will only improve the context for participants of civil society, of which includes not society as organized, but farmers, consumers, etc. And that was possible at that time. Then started this whole process of negotiating and trying to create a sui generis legislation. This took, I might add here that for anyone who's into advocacy, and if the climate for advocacy comes around ever again, uh, one thing to remember is that advocacy is a very, very long drawn out process. Gene Campaign's own involvement with the sui generis legislation took about 10 years, just hanging on to the issues repeatedly. Now, the sui generis legislation went through several iterations. It saw three governments, two joint parliamentary committees, where over and over again the clauses were discussed. I want to emphasize that at that time, the first clause of the farmer's rights, the right that was given to the farmer to save seed, re-sow seed, etc., was given a lot of emphasis. The right to save seed. And there were several international petitions that went around that the farmers must be ensured the right to save seed, etc. This is something that we in Jane Campaign refused to sign on to, because we thought that farmers' rights had to go way beyond the right to save seed. This is a very European concept, and here is another warning: find your own parameters, find your own demands. The right to save seed was nowhere near enough, and we said that since India's largest seed producer is the farming community, the farmer is India's largest seed company. Therefore, the farmer's right to sell seed must be ensured in the legislation, and that took the longest while to resolve. And what used to happen in several meetings would be that government representatives, which very, very unfortunately were actually on the other side, would say the right to sell seed was given, but with the caveat, but not as seed. Can sell his or her farm produce, but not as seed. And it took years to get this clarified: to sell his or her farm produce, including as seed. Those of you who've joined this debate a little later may not remember this, but this is how this very, very hard won right to sell farm produce as seed, with the caveats of non-branding, etc., was finally settled. And that is when, in August 3rd of 2001, that this legislation was ultimately passed. Now, what we did try to do, what Gene Campaign did try to do, was bring in elements of the CBD, of the Convention on Biological Diversity, into the farmers' rights legislation in the form of the National Gene Fund, recognition of farmers' rights, which is the benefit sharing clause of the CBD, the benefit sharing clause of the convention. We attempted to bring that in by having the farmers' rights recognized as the farmer being a contributor of knowledge and material, and therefore the National Gene Fund was set up in order to be the receptacle of such recognitions of farmers' rights in the form of payments, which have been paltry, but which must exist and which will be the receptacle for recognizing benefit sharing. So that was an attempt to link with the CBD. The other thing that Gene Campaign took a very strong position was right from the beginning that there was no way that Indian legislation should go the way of UPOV, which was the dominant pressure. That even in the Dunkel draft and subsequent to that, that whatever the sui generis legislation of any country should be, it should be modeled on the UPOV structure, which meant strong breeders' rights, no farmers' rights, but a farmer exemption. So Gene Campaign opposed this right from the beginning, that there is no way that our sui generis legislation can be tied up with any model. A sui generis is mine and I will frame the way I want. UPOV is not a model for us. We took this anti-UPOV position further. But let me quickly recount for you the rights that are given in the legislation, and also flag here that subsequent to the legislation being passed and the drafting of rules is when a lot of dilution began to take place. Unfortunately, this was done by our own administration, our own bureaucracy, our own scientists, our own government. But before we get into that, what are the rights of the farmer? The right to save, exchange, and sell, absolutely sell, but without using the breeder's name. The right of the farmer to register his or her variety. I mean, the farmer has complete rights and need not pay any fee. The farmer's intervention at any stage, according to this legislation, does not require the payment of any fees for any purpose, including registering his or her variety. As I said, a national gene fund has been set up, which is, as I said, also the benefit sharing clause brought into the farmer's rights, that anything that uses a farmer variety, any variety that uses a farmer variety, will have to pay for the use of that variety. And that is like paying for using a resource. And that amount should be put into the National Gene Fund. Now, the National Gene Fund was meant, and at that time I was a member of those committees as well, and we fought that this National Gene Fund cannot be used for administrative purposes. This National Gene Fund should be used to strengthen conservation. That means anyone who was really wonderful at conservation should be aided and supported by the National Gene Fund to further conserve land races, folk varieties, etc. But there is dilution in the rules where the government brought in that this can be used for other purposes as well, which is unfortunate, and which we can still claim to fight against. Now, there is also protection to the farmer against innocent infringement, because when we were drafting the legislation, and I was on the so-called expert committee to draft the legislation, which is an exercise in itself. You should have seen the opposition of government to anything to do with farmers' rights. That was really painful to watch, and it was a very hard fight over months and sittings of the committee. How everybody in government thought that farmers were idiots and they needn't have rights, and somebody else, the government, could act on their behalf. When we suggested that farmers should be members of committees, I remember one joint secretary saying, and in which language would they be able to participate in such a committee? To which I responded, well, the committee will have to learn the language that the farmer will be able to speak in. So these are the kind of skirmishes that went on, which delayed the process, I'm telling you this to give you a flavor of how this act finally went through several upheavals and burdens to find a place. Now, after this act was enacted, this was August 2001. In May 2002, this was the government of Atal Bihari Vajpayee. This is purely for purposes of record, went and made an application to join UPOV. Now, everything for the last 9-10 years that everybody had fought for to draft the Indian sui generis legislation was to keep it away from UPOV and to try and link the more pro-farmer, pro-community CBD features with our own sui generis legislation. And the hard-won farmers' rights definition with its claim to compensation, with its protection against innocent infringement, with its right to sell, etc., would all go down the tubes if we were to become a member of UPOV. What is UPOV? UPOV is a platform which has been created by the international seed industry. It is essentially a breeder's rights platform. I mean, just short of patenting. Industry is tenacious. It does not let go of its advantages. So the UPOV went through cycles of 1978 and 91, the UPOV 1972, the 1978, and the 1991. In all, there's a misunderstanding that the earlier UPOV versions were more benign to farmers. They never were. All UPOV versions have a farmer's exemption. So UPOV has only one right, the breeder's right. No other right. Anything else for a researcher or a breeder is an exemption to the central breeder's right. The farmers' rights legislation of India gives two parallel rights, a farmer's right and a breeder's right. Now, opting for UPOV would mean the annihilation of farmers' rights and reducing it to an exemption. In 1978, and UPOV kept the door open for India for a very, very long time to join UPOV, saying that even when they had acceded to the 1991 clause, that they would keep 78 open for India so that India could join the more benign form of farmers' exemptions. We fought against this and filed a writ petition in the Delhi High Court, asking the court to restrain the government from making any further applications or joining UPOV, because this would destroy the rights given to Indian farmers in the Indian legislation. And the unspoken threat was also that were the government to take a step like this, I mean, this was, of course, outside the court, were the government to take a step like this, we would then take to the streets and protest and ask farmers to stand up and defend their rights. What we also did at the same time, when I say we, I mean Gene campaign, what we also did at the same time was prepare an alternative draft to UPOV, saying UPOV is a developed country, seed industry driven platform to share seed material, etc. India should have a different platform, and we drafted what was called the Convention of Farmers and Breeders, COFAB for short. And in which COFAB, a lot of commentary and debate happened after we made the draft public. And that COFAB is a more, this was done together in partnership with CIAD, Center for Environment and Agricultural Development, which was headed at that time by Dr. S.K. Sinha, the late Dr. S.K. Sinha, one-time director of the Indian Agricultural Research Institute, and a very sound scientist, a very good scientist. So we had drafted this, the two organizations had drafted this COFAB as a developing country alternative to the UPOV model. And in the 1999 Human Development Report of the UNDP, there is a citation saying that the COFAB is a far better, stronger, and more cohesive, I forget the exact wordings, platform for developing countries than any European-style legislation. So there was an endorsement from, let's say, the more developing country community for COFAB as against UPOV for India and developing countries. It was unfortunately our own government that did not want to talk about COFAB as an option for India. And UPOV was petrified that if India did indeed draft any kind of an alternative, whether it was COFAB or something similar or something other, it would really challenge the authority of UPOV as the single most, or as the only option for regulating, internationally regulating seed with farmers and breeders in play. And the one thing they did not want was another platform coming up as a parallel or an alternative to the UPOV model. And the Indian government very successfully ensured that it did not. So UPOV remains the only platform. COFAB remains an alternative that was suggested for developing countries. At any time when there is a more propitious time, we could think of taking this up again. Now, I think that this is what I want to say briefly about how the legislation came into place, very briefly about its clauses. But I'll say a word about IPR. IPR in the context of seed, IPR in the context of genetic material. And this is something that I have repeated in several lectures, so to try and give it currency, including the India Today conclave when I spoke there on genetic diversity and why farmers' rights or why intellectual property rights on plant varieties was something that needed to be looked at very carefully. And the example I give, which is the example I'm going to repeat here again, is that if you take a variety, existing variety, and say that it took 100 steps to develop that variety, then without batting an eyelid, you can concede that the 98 steps there, or at least anything between 95 to 98 steps of those 100 steps, were taken by farming communities. You can say Adivasi communities, farming communities, farmers, who actually bred these varieties out of wild plants, gave them shape and form, identified their properties, conserved them over generations, and knew how to use them. The difference between a variety and variety of the kind that farmers maintain is they know what its properties are. So, traditional varieties, folk varieties, land races, they are not only varieties that contain genetic material, they are varieties that contain a lot of information, community knowledge as well. So out of those 100 varieties, 100 steps that go into making a variety, if 95 to 98 belong to the farmer, where is the question of IPR for capping one gene at the end of it? This was an effort to create a very simple example to demolish any claim that I have put in a new gene, let's say the BT gene or the XY gene, that I have put in a new gene and therefore this is an innovation. You have put in one step of 100 steps. 99, 95, 97, 98 steps have been brought in by somebody else. And therefore, the claim to any patenting or intellectual property contribution or the adding of any spectacular innovation falls flat when you put it into this concept. And just one short word, because this was raised as a point to think about. There are studies done to show that intellectual property rights has got absolutely no connection with the success of a variety. A variety that is highly successful, that is sought after in the market, that farmers scramble to get, has no connection to IPR. A variety that is successful because it does something that the farmers wanted to do, not because it has an IPR on it. I don't want to go further into the IPR question, but I thought I'd just flag it in case other people wanted to take this up. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Suman Sahai. It was a very crisp and comprehensive overview. And you carry what can be termed as institutional memory of what actually happened at that point of time. And for many people who are listening in, this would be the first time that they would have heard about what actually unfolded back then. And you pointed out that it was not just about getting parallel farmers' rights, but also a stiff resistance against India joining the UPOV regime. And it was an optimization or maximization of the sui generis space, and it mostly drew from principles of the CBD. Thanks a lot for that. I request Ishtiaq Ahmed to kindly translate the gist of what Dr. Suman Sahai had said.
Thanks, Kavita. सुमन साहे जी ने कहा कि तो 2000 और उसके पहले का जो समय था वो WTO का बहुत ज़्यादा प्रेशर था, और उसमें दो चीज़ वो चाहते थे कि भारत में बीज से संबंधित कानूनों में शामिल हो। एक तो इंटेलेक्चुअल प्रॉपर्टी राइट्स कंपनियों, यानी जो बीज तैयार करने वाली कंपनियां उनको मिला करें, और बीज की पेटेंटिंग को वो के पक्ष में थे। तो वैसे समय में एक लंबी प्रक्रिया चली एडवोकेसी की, और वो किसानों की बीज संरक्षण का अधिकार उसमें शामिल करने की बात थी। लेकिन सुमन जी कह रही थी कि सिर्फ बीज संरक्षण का अधिकार जो है वो एक बहुत ही सीमित सोच का नतीजा है, जबकि भारत के किसान सबसे बड़े बीज उत्पादक भी हैं, और उनको बेचने का भी अधिकार होना चाहिए। हालांकि सरकारी अफसर बेचने का अधिकार किसानों को नहीं देना चाहते, बीज के तौर पे बेचने का अधिकार नहीं देना चाहते। तो आखिरकार 2001 में एक लंबी प्रक्रिया के बाद आखिरकार किसानों को पूरे अधिकार मिले और उसमें बीजों का संरक्षण करना है, उनको बचा करके रखने और बेचने का अधिकार शामिल था। किसी भी तरह से की कोई फीस नहीं ली जाएगी किसानों से, इस बात का अधिकार था और उनके अपने जो बीज थे उनको रजिस्टर कराने का भी अधिकार उसमें शामिल था। और एक और अधिकार जो किसानों को मिला वो नेशनल जीन फंड या राष्ट्रीय जीन फंड द्वारा बीज के संरक्षण या उनका विकास करने वाले जो प्रॉमिसिंग किसान हैं, अग्रज किसान हैं, वैसे किसानों को आर्थिक मदद का प्रावधान उसमें शामिल किया गया। लेकिन ये कानून बनाने के अगले साल ही यानी 2002 में ही भारत सरकार ने कोशिश शुरू की कि वो यूपॉव से जुड़ जाए, उसकी सदस्यता मिल जाए उसको। और यूपॉव की जो पूरी अवधारणा है वो इस पे टिकी हुई है कि बीज बनाने वालों का अधिकार, किसानों का अधिकार उनके लिए कोई मायने नहीं रखता है, जबकि भारतीय कानून जो था वो किसानों के अधिकार को भी मान्यता देता था। तो वैसे में यूपॉव के का एक वैकल्पिक कानून ड्राफ्ट किया गया और कोफैब के तहत इस पूरे अभियान को चलाने की कोशिश की गई। अंतिम बात जो उन्होंने कही कि इंटेलेक्चुअल प्रॉपर्टी राइट के बारे में उनका कहना यह है कि आमतौर पे कोई एक बीज कंपनी कोई एक स्टेप बीज तैयार करने का नया स्टेप उसमें ऐड करती है और कहती है कि हमको इसका पेटेंट मिल जाना चाहिए, इसका आईपीआर हमको मिल जाना चाहिए, यानी इंटेलेक्चुअल प्रॉपर्टी राइट्स मिल जाना चाहिए। लेकिन इसमें प्रॉब्लम क्या है कि उसके पहले के 100 या 95 96 स्टेप्स जो किसानों ने उस बीज को एक खास स्तर तक पहुंचाने में लगाए हैं, वो सारे उनके अधिकार खत्म हो जाते हैं और एक स्टेप ऐड करने के लिए कंपनियों के पास वो अधिकार चला जाता है इंटेलेक्चुअल प्रॉपर्टी का, जो कि सही नहीं है उनके हिसाब से। धन्यवाद कविता।
Thank you, Ishtiaq. So the 2001 Act came in, and there have been several subsequent struggles. And as you heard, it's a unique legislation which looked at farmers as seed conservers and custodians. It also looked at farmers as contemporary seed breeders. And it also looked at farmers as those who consume seed and get it from other sources, including other farmers. So it looked at farmers in these broad three categories. And, where plant varietal registration laws in other countries, including countries in Asia, had stamped out farmer rights quite a bit and had actually criminalized them for even saving seed. We have statutes which give enormous draconian powers in other countries, even around us, of seizure of property of farmers for so-called infringements and so on. Here we have with the Indian legislation, but it still poses dilemmas. It is still antithetical to how agriculture has always been practiced by farmers in this country. And against this picture, I'd like to invite Shalini Bhutani to present her views on the Protection of Plant Varieties and Farmers' Rights Act, where she's asking if this is indeed a farmers' rights legislation or not. Shalini, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Kavita, and to the organizers as well. And I will keep my video off to retain the audio quality of this presentation. You have the presentation before you, and grateful for the background that Dr. Suman Sahai offers, given the long experience and the journey with this legislation and the pre-legislative processes that happen. And I would stick to that point of process, because it's not that lawmaking is a one-time act of legislature. every notification thereafter, every administrative order, every regulation that is made under the principal legislation is the making of the law every day in real time. And I think it's very opportune that 20 years after the lawmaking process happened, how are we faring today? Can we really raise the question and answer that this is truly a farmer's seed rights law? The nomenclature of the act says this is the protection of plant varieties, and something that was subsequently appended or added was the chapter on farmers' rights. But let's revisit, given that in the last 20 years, all that has happened, I'd like to juxtapose on the right-hand side of the screen the agro-industrial model in which this particular IPR legislation fits. And on the left-hand side, the continuing lived realities of seed systems where IPR is still not the norm. And given the background that Dr. Sahai gave us of the World Trade Organization and its treaty obligations for us under TRIPS to have intellectual property rights institutionalized in the seed and agriculture sector, what this particular act did was to try and make IPR the norm in the seed sector, which is still not the basis on which a lot of the farmer managed seed systems are premised on. So I think it's important to recall that despite having an IPR law on plant varieties, there are several thousand farmers across the world and in India that do believe that IPR on seed and planting material is a misfit. So what does the act really do in terms of how far does it go in recognizing farmers' seed rights? Please stay on the previous slide. It says a farmer shall be deemed to be entitled to. And already Dr. Sai mentioned to us how contentious and how hard of the provisions were, which particularly, this is at the core of it. What is the legal meaning of the term deemed? Deemed in law means something has characteristics or quality it does not actually have. So it's a deemed university, unless the law recognizes the university, it's recognized as a university. Likewise, if an act is deemed a crime by law, then only it is held to be a crime. Otherwise, it is not. So here, the words deemed to be, I think, should be removed. Governments and legislatures recognize that a farmer shall purpose this kind of free. And I think it's a lot in afterthought that we are now revisiting the language of the act. Farmer it is, because if the statute changes and if there are amendments in the statute, does that mean those farmers' rights that this act supposedly guarantees will no longer remain? And that also calls for civil society monitoring and farmers groups monitoring the actual implementation of this legislation. Next slide, please.
Shalini, two requests, please. Can you put your video on if possible? And can you also space out what you're saying? Because sometimes there's an audio problem.
Okay. I'd like to also thank the existing legislation which was passed prior to the IPR regime in India, which creates an exemption clause in a provision which says that it shall not apply to farmer seeds and farmer to farmer sales. This is section 24, and we need to look at what the emerging draft of the Seeds Bill of 2009 does to guarantee farmer seed freedoms. Because on the other hand, on the left-hand side, you have farmer managed seed systems, which believe that farmers have inherent seed freedoms that even predate modern states and legislatures that come out with whether IPR or seed laws or hybrid. The new generation of seed legislation have a hybrid provisions of both seed marketing controls and regulations of quality, as well as IPR built into them. And I think we need to also not only look at farmers' seed freedoms within the limited frame that this particular act offers, but also read it along with emerging legislation on seed. Next slide, please. What the particular act does is that if and when breeders seek intellectual property right in the form of plant variety certificates, then during the duration of that time, what is the kind of farmers' seed freedoms or farmers' rights do they have vis-a-vis the IPR protected variety? So a lot of the emphasis of the legislation is on that aspect. And particularly, this comes through very strongly in the implementation in the last couple of years, which we'll also see in terms of the quantum and speed at which varieties are being registered. What is that trend actually showing us? On the other hand, there are farmers who have never asked for private rights on seeds. And therefore, to say that now you have farmers' seed rights within a framework that only talks about private rights on seeds and exclusive economic control during the duration of that plant variety protection is again a mismatch between existing farmers' time-honored seed systems, as well as what is called the new world of intellectual property rights. And so I think it's important to see that the interpretation of seed freedoms in the PPV&FR Act, while at one hand it recognizes that farmers, they are deemed to have wider seed freedoms as they've already enjoyed and always enjoyed prior to the coming of this act, but it's important to see how the limited seed rights that farmers get vis-a-vis the protected variety. When we say protected variety under this act, it means an IPR protected variety. So you can choose to stay out of that system by using your own seed. If farmers use their own seed, they have no kind of restriction that this act puts on them. But the minute they're using IPR protected varieties, then they have to be careful about the terrain that they're walking on. The next slide, please. What the rights per se, farmer seed rights per se, but farmers' rights as consumers of somebody else's IP protected varieties. And while there is law which says that even as consumers, farmers' rights will be protected, but there has been no case so far in which the authority has actually invoked those provisions. Meanwhile, this is not to say that seed quality issues are concerned in farmer managed seed systems, but they have developed, whether truthfully labeled seed schemes or participatory guarantee seed schemes, where you have trusted networks and you have the known source from where you are getting your seed from, and characteristics such as local value for cultivation can somehow navigate the whole issue of seed quality. But here in an agro-industrial model, spatially displaced and distant seed, it becomes very one-sided to get compensation from a breeder of that variety if it does not. Likewise, the next slide please, is the issue of compulsory licensing. If in a situation a variety is not in reasonable quality and at a reasonable price, then there is a specific provision in section 47 of the Act which says that farmers, the authority can, if an application is received by the authority, then the authority could actually issue a compulsory license forcing the variety breeder to produce and make it available for there have been other agriculture has used under other legislation. For instance, seed pricing has been controlled, particularly on genetically modified cotton seed through Cotton Seeds Price Control Order of 2015 under the Essential Commodities Act, where a committee is set up and then the Ministry of Agriculture issues a notification, putting a ceiling and recommending a maximum sale price value for GM cotton seeds. But by and large, for controlling the prices of IPR protected varieties as a whole, this particular provision has never been invoked by the authority. On the other hand, when it comes to seed pricing in farmer managed seed systems,
Shalini, your audio is not too clear.
Other networks. Yes.
Yeah, so
the next slide, please.
I guess, I mean, any movements from your side is probably affecting the audio. Just be careful. Thanks.
The thing to remember at the large, what is recognized as the official seed system, is essentially organized around IPR legislation, around the new agricultural marketing legislation that are coming, and that is the global seed market, where the dominant players are the seed companies as well as the public sector, and in which the new varieties dominate as the innovative and more supported varieties. But on the other hand, even in the nomenclature and the way in which farmer managed seed systems are viewed, they're seen as informal, as traditional, as something as that is of a certain time and not of relevant now, even though there has been a resurgence and I would say a renaissance in a sense of traditional varieties. But I think the issue is, how does this law then determine the interaction, the informal seed system and the formal official seed system?
Shalini, we seem to have lost you. Can one of the co-hosts tell me whether you're able to hear her?
No, we are not able to.
Okay, thanks.
If you look at the preambular provisions of this act, it makes it very clear that this was a legislation which was going to recognize the contributions that farmers made. But what kind of contributions? Was this a law which says that it would recognize and protect all the inherent seed rights of farmers? It actually says that this is a law that will protect the rights of farmers for the contribution they make in making available plant genetic resources. This is the cue to understand the whole scheme of the act. Because if you see this as an agro-industrial model of seed production, you need raw material, which is the basis and which comes from the informal seed systems. This becomes the basis for the production of the new varieties that the official formal seed system will quote unquote value add and then release as a new seed product. And another very telling paragraph in the preambular provision of the Act is that this is necessary to facilitate the growth of the seed industry, which in turn will assure the availability of high quality seeds and planting material to the farmers. Dr. Suman Sahib just reminded us that the farmers are the biggest seed company not only in India, but across the world. And they pose the biggest challenge to the official seed system in terms of seed production. Officially, it is recognized that even now, even today, 60% of seeds farmers source from their own farms. And therefore, what is the official seed system does rely on the informal seed system. And what it does is essentially to seek the raw material, whether in terms of knowledge or genetic material, from the farmer managed system. And that is system facilitates variety.
Shalini, can you please wind
And
up in the next 2-3 minutes? The audio is also causing a problem.
Next slide, please. The folk varieties, the land races, the traditional cultivars, essentially this
Shalini, I'm really sorry to be doing this, but there's a serious problem with your audio. We can't hear you. So I don't know what to do other than maybe call the next speaker, and can you try and see what the issue is at your end? And can Ajay, who's been projecting the slides, remember the slide number, please? I'm sorry to be doing this. May I request Kapil Bhai Shah to please come in at this point of time. Kapil Bhai will, just 1 second. Yeah, so we will look at a presentation around Ishtiaq, I'm going to request you to translate in one go after we bring back Shalini again. Can you just acknowledge that you heard me on that?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks. So we'll move to a presentation by Kapil Bhai Shah, and he will describe very quickly what happened in Gujarat in 2018 and 19 when PepsiCo Holdings, PepsiCo India Holdings Private Limited chose to sue some potato farmers in the name of infringements of its rights under the PPV&FR Act. And Pepsi had to withdraw the cases under tremendous public pressure and outrage. And Kapil Bhai Shah was right in the middle of that particular struggle. And subsequently, we have also applied for revocation of Pepsi's potato varietal certificate, and that is right now under adjudication. Kapil Bhai, over to you.
Thank you, Kavita. I hope you can hear me and see my presentation. Please confirm.
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So the whole world knows that about 18 months ago or so, in April or May last year, PepsiCo came up with a kind of issue, and we saw this through a newspaper item. We approached those farmers and tried to see what is happening in the name of IPR to Indian farmers. That was the first case in India. We were very much hearing about what is happening in especially Europe, mainly in USA and Canada. But this was the first time, to our knowledge, any farmer has been sued by a company on IPR on CDQ. It was a path-setting kind of a case. So we realized that we need to look at it, what is happening. And then we also realized that earlier year, in the nearby district, the 5 other farmers have also been sued with a compensation short about 20 lakh rupees for each case. This time, 4 farmers, there were independent cases, and each one of them were sued for asking compensation for more than 1 crore. So it was we don't know how it can be justified by the company that in 1 year the value of the crop increases by 5 times. Anyway, but the plaintiff has said that it has got exclusive right to produce, sell, market, distribute, import, export, and export the same registered variety, quoting number section 21, 28 of the Act. We also realized that so in some of the cases, while we went for field kind of a study, then we realized that some of the farmers' trucks have been intercepted by the police, saying that they are making illegal sale. We don't know that whether this act can really stop sale of the harvest, even if it is an IPR protected. So this is the reality. We know this. And I don't want to go into the details right now. It is very much mentioned very well. But what is important here to know is this section 20A. If you dissect this section, it has 3 parts. One is the position of the protector. And it is very much named in the title. It is called plant protection, protection of plant varieties and farmers' right. It doesn't say protection of plant varieties and breeders' right, or companies' right, or scientists' right, or researchers' right. So, as very well said by Sumanji, it's a very unique kind of an act where farmers' rights are superimposed over all other sections. And the breeder's right here, which we call a registrant's right, whoever registers the variety, the IPR protection is subject to the provision of this other provisions of this act. It's very important to know. Secondly, what are the activities protected here? Produce, sell, market, distribute, import, and export. So all other activities are not protected. And what is protected is the product. Variety is protected. We need to know what is variety. So rights are to the registrant are rightfully restricted, which as a farm organization, as an activist, as a scientist, as a bureaucrat, as a politician, as a farm leader, all of us should know. Secondly, now, see what are the activities which are not protected? So if the farmer saves the seed, sow the seed, resow the seed, grow the seeds, cultivate the seeds, cultivate the variety, purchase, all these activities of the protected variety are not protected under section 20. Because we can interpret this because the activities, whatever the terms used, sell, market, distribute, import, and export, refers to seeds and the propagals only, not to the harvest. So these are the activities, as far as variety is concerned, are not protected, which a registrant should know. Likewise, the commercial non-seed harvest, once the protected variety is sown, but the harvest the crop, to pack the crop, to transport and process and store and use the crop, the harvest is also not protected. So as far as the product activities are concerned, these are activities not protected at all.
You mean not protected from the side of the certificate holder?
Yes.
The certificate holder does not get these rights.
Rights.
I'm just clarifying in case it is confusing to a...
Yeah, not to the farmer, to the registrant. These are not protected for the benefit of the registrant.
Right.
Thank you. And what is variety? It is very important, and a kind of a plant breeder or those who are into breeding, scientists and researchers would know this better. Variety is defined in the Act, and it should have 3 basic categories: distinctness, uniformity, stability. It also described that it should have the seeds or the propagules see the point number 3. Variety is considered a unit with regards to suitability of being propagated, which remains unchanged after such propagation. The question rises whether the farmers have produced variety. This is the question we are trying to explore. There is a huge difference, and any plant breeder or seed producer would know what is the difference between produce the variety and production from the variety. Considering the nature and type of sowing material, technical types of the parent material, or this material being sowed, a need for production protocol. There are standards to produce the variety. There is no need to follow those standards. Spatial care and knowledge skills are required to produce the variety. Purpose of efforts is different. Description and some examples to make it simple for the layman or the laywoman. See, if you produce a sugarcane eye or a mango graft from a nursery for vegetative propagation, or a kind of a potato tuber from tissue culture laboratory, or a hybrid cotton seed, is the production of variety. But if you sow the produced variety the next year, mango, the grafted mango you are cultivating for table purpose, potato for processing purpose, or wheat for chapati purpose, sugarcane for jaggery purpose, chrysanthemum flower as a cut flower, it is not the production of variety. Same way, there are technical names for it. Ability to germinate matters in production of variety. The final produce must have good germination ability, viability. There are standards for it. It doesn't matter between a flower of chrysanthemum doesn't need any germination ability. It is not at all a production of variety. Likewise, the risk is there, end user is different, pricing is different. Many such differences are there, which categorically say that production of variety is very different from production from variety. It is basically a cultivation of particular variety to produce the commercial harvest. General farmers. So read these farmers, which have been sued by the PepsiCo, has really infringed the Section 28 for which they have been sued. No, they have not produced a variety. They have sowed, cultivated, grew, and harvested the commercial crop for the non-seed purpose. They just wanted to sell it for the wafer purpose. That is very much mentioned in the video itself. Unfortunately, this becomes confusing because in the case of potato, the propagule itself is the commercial harvest. If you see the case of banana where sucker is planted, or in case of chrysanthemum, a cutting or a palm is planted, and a chrysanthemum flower or banana which we eat on table is harvested. One can see the difference very well. But in potato, it becomes confusing for even for lawyers, or for judges, for the layperson, even for regulators. So they have not produced. My main point is they have not produced the value. They have produced just a commercial harvest, and so Section 28 cannot be applied on them. Forget Section 28 right now. Of course, this has not been, they have not infringed at all, but as rightly said earlier, Section 39(4) gives various kind of rights, and it is not an exemption. It's the rights of the farmers. Don't say that the farmers are exempted from protection. No. And the position of this Section 28, if you go with the whole text in red font here, notwithstanding anything contained in this. In the earlier Section 28, it was subject to the other provisions. So this is very much an overarching clause, and these are the activities farmers are allowed to save their seeds, protected variety, use, sow, resow, everything. And what is required is the product their farm produce, including seeds, is very important. The farmers are empowered with the rights to save their seeds of a variety protected. Save the seeds, use all this kind of things. It's not just the farm produce as banana, but the suckers can also be used by the farmers, saved and used and so and resown, exchange and share and so on, sold by the farmers. But there is also a mention about the whole tradition and the custom or the practice of Indian agriculture, as is a part of the act, as was entitled before coming into the force of this. It's very important, but there is a restriction, as Suman just said, they can't sell in branded form. And there is an explanation given what they mean by branding, and it is packaged and labeled, and on top it can be said as a branding. This is very crystal clear law, and this is subject. This has nothing to do with. This has nothing to do with all this kind of points mentioned in the green fonts here. It is this, all rights are given irrespective of registration date, type of crop, type of propagation, place of breeding, America में किया है या हिंदुस्तान में किया है, generation of seed, वो बीज कहाँ से खरीदा गया, कैसे खरीदा गया, कहीं से exchange में आया है, it has been received through exchange or saving from the earlier generation, किसने बेचा है, who has sold, time, place, sale of the harvest. After the seed is sown and crop is cultivated, where the harvest is sold, it also doesn't matter. And type of the buyer or of the harvest doesn't matter. Irrespective of all this, 10 things, 10 points, 10 conditions, the rights are given to the farmers. With the public pressure, PepsiCo has definitely withdrew the case. But unfortunately, they made a mention in the withdrawal application with this sentence, and it is really a worrisome sentence, relying on its discussion, company's discussion with the government to find long-term and amicable solution of issue around its seed products. So they rely on government. Question here is, what has been discussed with the government? It was government of Gujarat, which gave appointment to the company's officers, but never responded to farmers' application and seeking meeting with the farmers. What is there to rely upon? And where is the proof? And on what basis government can give a kind of this kind of assurance, if any assurance given, to find an amicable solution, long-term solution? And how will this assurance be implemented now? Changing the law, changing the regulation, changing the FAQs, changing the interpretations, we don't know. Does it point to some modification in the law and its implementation? And we know that there is international pressure on our Indian IPR regime. And should India allow such modification? It's a question to all of us who think for farmers' rights, and who think for those 98, 97, 99 steps taken care by farmers, and a couple of last steps were done in the breeding program by the registered company, scientists, or whoever, even the farmer who breeds the variety and takes IPR. So we should allow such kind of modification. This is the question which still hangs around. These are the lessons we learned. Ignorance is a curse. Farmers, organizations, their leaders, all were ignorant. Lawyers were ignorant. Government officers were ignorant. We saw that government officers were telling we don't know about this. Judiciary, which gave interim order, which gave an order without listening to the farmers, seized the stock, appointed court commissioner. They didn't. They were completely ignored. We realized. Innocence was and temptation can be used by the company or whatever, because farmers were given full soap, all video kind of recording, audio kind of recording was given, samples were taken. The role of people in power is difficult to understand. They generally back the companies we know. Are they trustworthy? Even after repeated requests, as I said, government never gave any appointment to the farmers and their representatives. And unfortunately, PPV&FR authority, which is meant for protection of farmers' rights, never waited for court director to speak out and never responded to it. Ample scope of misinterpretation. Even we realized that FAQ big booklet which describes the regulations, how to interpret, was withdrawn. And they admitted in the new FAQ booklet saying that people have brought attention to the mistake we have made in the earlier FAQ booklet, and so we are withdrawing. It means that the whole case has exposed the misinterpretation, and still many things are still unclear in the new FAQ booklet. Registrants may also misinterpret. You can see that the whole case. You can read how the registrant, the company PepsiCo, has misinterpreted the act. And there are many basic lacuna. There is no role of state government. Till date, state governments are handling the seed-related regulation. But there is no role of state government. Tribunal is not yet set up. No proactive vigilance from the authority. Not in a provision to punish registrants. Support system for farmers at state level is very much needed. Is very much missing. Where farmers should go if such things happens to them. Registration certificate should carry special mention. We demand this, that any registration, all registration certificate given to registrants should carry a special mention about 3914. And registrants need to advertise the provision, because registrant, the Pepsi, made advertisement in the newspaper that we have protection on this. But they never said that farmers have this kind of rights over the, even it is registered variety. Even it is a protected variety. Farmers have got right under 3914. So it should be made compulsory in the regulation that the registrant should make necessary advertisement for the benefit of the farmers also. Intent of the law is very important to interpret the law. Role of media and consumer is important. They can be brought in for the national interest. And power of people with power of truth together wins. And role of civil society organization is inevitable in a democratic society. This is the lesson we have learned, and this is finally what is happening on the ground. Farmers are enjoying their rights over FC5, the PepsiCo protected variety. They do grow, sow, and enjoy the freedom as given in the law, and companies still happy with their claim to serve the farmers. This is how we enjoy this which keeps given to them. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kapil Bhai. You were very much instrumental in PepsiCo withdrawing its cases against farmers in Gujarat back then, and you've been pretty vigilant on the whole issue since then. In your presentation, I think you have delineated very, very clearly what the boundaries of Section 28 are, the so-called rights that accrue to variety certificate holders. And you also pointed out that 3914 is overarching over all other provisions. May I request Ishtiaq to please translate?
Yeah. So Kapil Bhai ने जो पिछले साल 2 सालों में 2018 और 19 में किसानों के खिलाफ पेप्सिको कंपनी के द्वारा मुकदमे दायर किए गए थे, उसके बारे में PPV&FR एक्ट के तहत उन पे मुकदमा दायर किया गया था। तो उसके बारे में इन्होंने बताया कि कैसे वो मुकदमे गलत थे। उन्होंने बताया कि प्रति एकड़ किसानों से 20 लाख रुपया मांगने की बात हुई उसमें, और फिर अगले साल उसको बढ़ा करके 1 करोड़ 5 लाख कर दिया गया। प्रति केस, हर केस में 1 करोड़ 5 लाख उनसे वसूलने की बात की गई, जबकि उन PPV&FR एक्ट में बहुत स्पष्ट है कि इसमें ब्रीडर्स के राइट नहीं है, बल्कि फार्मर्स के राइट्स को बचाने की बात है, किसानों के अधिकारों को बचाने की बात है, न कि ब्रीडर्स के अधिकारों को बचाने की बात है। इस तहत जो सेक्शन 28 है, उसमें बीज बचाना, लगाना, यानी उसको रोपना, दोबारा रोपना, और ये सब अधिकार सेक्शन 28 में
सेक्शन 3914 में किसानों को
दिए गए, और 28 में ये सारे अधिकार कंपनियों के पास हैं, या जो रजिस्ट्रेंट हैं जिन्होंने रजिस्ट्रेशन कराया है उसका, उनके पास अधिकार है, लेकिन वो किसानों को रोकने से रोक नहीं सकते हैं, यानी किसान इसको इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं। उन्होंने एक और बात कही कि प्रोड्यूसिंग द वैरायटी, यानी कोई वैरायटी को प्रोड्यूस करना और यानी उसको तैयार करना, पैदा करना और उसके इस्तेमाल करने में बहुत अंतर है। और इसको इन्होंने कई आधार पे इन अंतरों को उन्होंने बहुत स्पष्ट तौर पे समझाया भी। फिर उनका सवाल था कि क्या किसानों ने फिर कानून तोड़ा था? तो उनका कहना है कि कानून नहीं तोड़ा था। आलू के मामले में एक परेशानी क्या है कि बीज ही अपने आप में उत्पाद भी है, इसलिए बहुत सारे अथॉरिटीज में और जजेस जो थे उनमें कंफ्यूजन था। लेकिन इसमें एक बात और बहुत स्पष्ट है कि किसान ब्रांडेड फॉर्म में किसी और के बीज से उत्पादित सामान को नहीं बेच सकते हैं। तो यहाँ पे किसानों ने वैसा नहीं किया था। इसमें जो हालांकि ये केस कंपनी ने वापस ले लिया बाद के दिनों में, लेकिन उन्होंने एक बड़ी खतरनाक वाक्य से अपने केस को अंत किया। यानी उन्होंने कहा कि गुजरात सरकार के साथ उनकी वार्ता हुई है और उसमें उनको कई सारे भरोसे दिए गए हैं कि आगे इसको कैसे सबके साथ मिलजुल करके इसको इस समस्या को दूर किया जा सकता है। लेकिन इसको खतरनाक कपिल भाई इसलिए कह रहे हैं क्योंकि उनके बीच में क्या बातचीत हुई, किसानों से तो सरकार के लोग नहीं मिले, गुजरात सरकार के, लेकिन कंपनी के लोगों से मिले। उनके बीच में क्या बातचीत हुई यह नहीं मालूम है, सरकार ने उन्हें क्या भरोसा दिया ये भी नहीं मालूम। और उन्होंने फिर पीपीवी एंड फार्मर्स राइट्स के जो एक्ट है उसमें कई सारी कमियां हैं उनको गिनाया, जिसमें कुछ हम आपके सामने रखेंगे। जैसे राज्य सरकार की एक मेजर भूमिका होनी चाहिए, लेकिन इस एक्ट में वो गायब है, वो दिखाई नहीं देती है। ट्रिब्यूनल अभी भी बन सकते हैं, सरकार के पास निगरानी की कोई समुचित व्यवस्था नहीं है, और जो जिन्होंने रजिस्ट्रेशन कराया है उन पर नियंत्रण के कोई समुचित प्रावधान नहीं है। ये कुछ चीजें जो हमने नोट की वो आपके सामने है। धन्यवाद।
कविता मैं आपको ये रिक्वेस्ट करना चाहता हूँ कि ये 28 का रिस्ट्रिक्शन है जो है ना, वो आप जरा फिर से आप भी थोड़ा बता दो, समझा दो। जो अधिकार दिए गए हैं वो बीज के उत्पादन के लिए दिए गए।
I think people understood. You made a very clear distinction between producing a variety over which protection has been granted, and compared it with what does protection from a variety by using a variety means, and that in most cases we are talking about producing from a variety when it comes to farmers as consumers of seed. I think the distinction came out quite clearly, and thank you for clarifying that legal point. As you rightly pointed out, Kapil Bhai, the PepsiCo episode itself is not over. There's still the threat looming on that case, and there's a wider threat on the PPV&FR Act itself in India. There's no doubt about it. There's been constant pressure to align ourselves to the UPOV regime, and we need to watch out for it. And the reason why we are doing this webinar is with the hope that so many of you who have been listening in and who've been assimilating new information as well as whatever information you already have will be part of a journey that protects farmers' seed rights. That is why the title of this webinar is called Protection of Farmers' Seed Rights. We are not talking just about farmers' seed rights. We will now move to Dr. K.S. Varaprasad, and he's a rare scientist. Let me tell you, whatever issue you take to him, he looks at it from a farmer-centric lens. And those of you who recall the BT Brinjal debate in this country will probably also recall the fact that Mr. Jairam Ramesh in his moratorium decision note has referred to scientists from NBPGR who pointed out to the dangers of BT brinjal, to the native diversity of brinjals in India. And Dr. Varaprasad was the one who put together information on that diversity and sent it onward as his role, and as a responsible scientist, as his duty to send to the minister back then. And he's a conservation breeder. And in the RRA network, Revitalizing Rain-Fed Agriculture Network, he's been leading a special effort to ensure that technical guidelines as well as legal norms don't come in the way of farmers' varieties being mainstreamed into formal seed systems. We'll listen to his presentation. Dr. Varaprasad, over to you. And we will bring in Shalini right after you. And if required, we will do a regular phone patching so that we hear her presentation completely. No worries on that count. Dr. Varaprasad.
Good evening to all the participants. Am I audible and visible?
Yes, you are. We can see your screen, we can see you, and you are audible.
Good, thank you. So this is farmers as custodians of crop diversity have been asked to cover. So I will be covering this topic from the angle of not just PPFRA, maybe farmers' right, seeds rights as a focus, which actually several acts also control the farmers' rights, seed rights, not just PPFRA alone. And PPFRA is extremely well covered right from its historical perspective to the latest PepsiCo case. So this, whenever we see any act coming, based on the act's context, the definition changes. The definitions used in that act changes. Farmers sometimes from the revenue angle, as the cultivators, they are projected or defined. And from the biodiversity angle, they are projected as conservers and preserves the wild species and traditional varieties. And from the Seed Act, they are like traders, buying, selling, exporting, importing seed. So based on the context of the act, the definition of the farmer is given in the act. We have a very large number of farmers in India, and custodian is a special word used more internationally, and less work is done in India compared to some of the countries, neighboring countries like Nepal. So the custodian, the role of the custodian is who uses the genetic diversity, who conserves them, and the most important is who is also an innovator. That's what is missing in most of the acts. And even if it is recognized, there are certain issues which I will tell you, and who is also promoter. So is user, conserver, innovator, and promoter. And mostly these custodians are better off economically compared to their peers in the community. That's how they are able to afford to use, to conserve, to innovate, and to promote. And they are relevant mostly in the diversity hotspots. And farmers, in this case, custodians, farmers need to lead, and scientists should play a supportive role, only supportive role, like systematic monitoring of the diversity, measuring the transitions, and documenting the drivers. These kind of roles scientists can assume, but the key roles of using, conserving, innovating, and promoting should be by the farmer himself. We have a large number of custodians in India. As if you see from the documentation angle, I have attended several meetings of the farmers and farmer leaders in the NGOs and the natural farming platform. And I see a large number of custodians are available, but the documentation is really missing. So, but in case of Andaman, there is some good documentation has been done, both for horticultural crops as well as the field crops, which I will give you in the next slide. This is actually the conservation is by community-based biodiversity management. And one of the things, even by the scientific groups, that is missing is continuous creation of novel and unique diversity. We use the existing diversity, but creation of diversity is something the custodians are specialized. They have certain advantages which ex situ people do not have. I will tell you a little later what is that. But creation of diversity, natural creation of diversity, as per the changing time and changing needs, is something which is very special to custodians. And when it comes to understand the crop diversity, we know that more than 18,000 flowering species are there in India. 117 species are originated here, mainly out of the crops rice, millets, and legumes belong to our country for the origin. There are 25 crop species are domesticated here. And even though there are sometimes exotic crops like chili, brinjal, tomato, groundnut, all these crops maybe around 400 to 800 years before they were introduced, but lot of diversity has been developed, native diversity within the country after introduction. And the 160 major and minor crops are cultivated. 325 wild relatives are also used. And in addition, we have 145 roots and tubers which are eaten, 521 ethnic greens which are not sown, but they are eaten. They have a lot of nutritional value. And many of the tribal groups can identify more than 100 leafy vegetables, whether they are good and what for they are good also they have the knowledge, which is largely ignored. Like 101 birds and flowers, 647 fruits. We just see at the national level work going on maybe on 10 to 15 fruits. But 647 fruits, most of them are minor fruits, which probably we have eaten it in our villages in our childhood, is no more seen now. They're lost. And they're lost with the time. And there are 118 seeds and nuts. So the diversity is tremendous. Crop diversity is tremendous. And the knowledge is also tremendous with the farmers. And in this context, let us see, as custodians, if you see, as I said earlier, the documentation is done in case of Andaman with very good description of the germplasm which they are conserving, a large number. I just took a few examples here to show that who are the custodians and what did they conserve and what is its value, just to give a glimpse of custodians. And the Andaman dwarf coconut, you can see that it's a tender coconut, much demand in the market. It's not just, it is better than any of the released varieties, and good demand is there. It's grown in Andaman. Like we have the other yams, water yam. It is also called as Nicobari Alu, and Aberdeen is the one who is the custodian. And we have, this is good for good cooking quality is there. It's like a staple food for some of the tribes there. Then Neel mango or blue mango, this is Chintharan, and it's very rich in ascorbic acid and flavonoids, and good demand for this particular variety. And among the field crops, Black Burma is the variety, which is very good for halwa making and Burma laddu. And probably these are some of the people might have migrated and brought the material into the island. And among these things, it is the only water yam is the one which is registered with CTCRI. And we have one institute specially for this island agriculture, which is based in Port Blair. And there with them, they have registered this. All other varieties are not at all registered, either with PPV&FR or with any other body. This is just a glimpse of the custodians. And if you see the conservation process, on-farm in situ conservation is most important. I will tell you why it is most important. But if you see examples, for in situ forest, kokum is there. Garcinia gambigata, it's mostly in Western Ghats. And this is used for even slimming. Some chemicals are extracted from it. It is in the forest. And the forest communities and farmers living nearby forest are the people who conserve, collect, use this particular germplasm. Among the crop groups, millets is the best example for on-farm conservation. And if you see the Sama, just to show here that these are the on-farm and in situ in the forest are examples of conservation by the farmers. Then we have also another form of conservation like field gene banks. This is field gene banks versus natural or on-farm in situ conservation. The difference is co-evolution is missing in the field gene banks or any ex situ gene banks. Co-evolution means that the wild species which are there, they interact with the cultivated species, and continuous improvement is there as the climate change or the pest structure changes. Then these genotypes will also change and improve. That kind of thing in the ex situ conservation is missing. And sustaining this kind of conservation in the midst of hotspots is more important than ex situ conservation. Then if you see ex situ conservation, the public funded organizations like MBPJR has got a seed bank which conserves the world's second largest gene bank in the world. 4,40,000 or 50,000 accessions are stored here. We have cryopreservation, where with liquid nitrogen you can store it at -180. In vitro conservation, tissue culture, where there is no seed available, still you can store it. Few hundreds of species are conserved this way. So this, while this conservation is done, what is the role of custodians? The material is brought. The important point I will tell you in the next slide, that how custodians are missing their role in the, the acts which I suggested earlier are, I'm trying to see the full slide. This Biological Diversity Act is the one which also deals with the farmer varieties and traditional varieties coming from the CBD. NBA is the implementing agency. There are 28 state biodiversity boards, and the land races are folk varieties. This is the most important point. We don't have a database of the traditional varieties in India. Like, for example, the NBPGR has got 4,60,000 for about 1,500 species. That's fine. But if you take one example of rice, some people claim 1 lakh farmer varieties are cultivated in India at once upon a time. But including the scientists, most of them agree that 30 to 40,000 varieties are there in India under cultivation at one time. And how many are registered with PPFRA? Just around 700. So where is 700? Where is 40,000? And what is missing? Where is the database? And what are the traits of those 40,000 varieties? And who is going to document it? Whose responsibility is that? That's what we need to really see. And yesterday I was listening to the Nagoya Protocol birthday global webinar was there. In that, Dr. Pispoti was telling the difference between equity, equitable sharing of benefits, and equality. Equality and equity difference is giving a shoe to everyone is equality, and giving a fitting shoe is equity. Like if you give, you are not treating the farmer and breeder, though on paper it is equity, but it is actually only on paper, but real equity is not there. And if we come to the PPFR is excellently covered, so I am not touching upon that much, except a few issues at the end. Seed Act is mostly for the notified varieties, even though on paper, even the farmer varieties, if they are sold commercially packed, the Seed Act will come into force. But actually it is oriented towards only notified varieties by the central government and state government. But there are excellent examples by the farmers who have brought, like for example, recently Desi cotton from Gujarat with an excellent quality and which can compete in yield also with the high yielding varieties. So similarly, there is one Balintha Pesalu in Adilabad district of Telangana, which has a very good protein meant for the pregnant mothers or lactating mothers. And there are several other examples there. So most of them, neither they are available in the seed, nor they are advertised, nor the knowledge is only limited. And then it is not gaining we are not taking advantage of those excellent traits of the traditional varieties. The Patent Act, even though anybody, including a farmer, also can patent it, there are very few examples. Example, Mr. Venkat Reddy from grape farmer has done a patent, the PCT, Patent Cooperation Treaty, 20 countries. He has done it, but by spending good money because he's a rich farmer. Otherwise, for a farmer to go for a patent is a distant dream. And then not only for technical difficulties, but also for money involved. Geographical indications, exclusive rights are given for commercialization, but most of them after registration do not get really the benefit. And many times, several associations who also have the same commodity are missing from the GI registration. And ABS guidelines, 2014, now actually revision is going on. So maybe in another few months, the revised may come for a better implementation. And the money till today is not shared with the communities. The money is lying with the state biodiversity boards, except very few cases in state biodiversity boards. National biodiversity got some few crores of money, but the guidelines for giving it to the communities is still missing. So there are most of these legal provisions are for registered varieties, notified varieties, GIs and registered germplasm by NBPGR, seed sales registration, but they are silent about farmer variety. Either you call it commercialization or access to several farmers is largely missing. Then if you see some issues related to farmer rights, PPFRA, maybe a little bit repetition, but I would like to give my perceptions on this. Examples given here are many of the varieties which were released by the ICR as extant varieties earlier, or by state universities like OEAT, they have been actually registered in the PPFRA. Private companies who released long back also have registered them as extant varieties, like in case of pearl millet. And individual varieties are also given, individual farmer also, like Tilak Chandan. It's very hard to believe that it belongs to only a single person. It should be a community-based variety, but they were also allowed in 2009. And farmer associations are also given registration. Example is rice, Chendellu. And then what are the issues in this, which have already been flagged? But my point is that the farmer equating with breeder looks very good and very logical and very attractive. But suppose if I am equated with PV Sindhu to play badminton, then the question is, am I on equal footing? Do I have access to training? Did I start in the right age? So am I accessible to public facilities available? These are the things what is missing in the farmer varieties. Unless the farmer is able to access to the public investments and become a developer, it's not just actually contributor, but also as a developer, because innovation has nothing to do with the formal education. Innovation is by mind. I know a farmer, Mr. Chandrasekhar, who brought an excellent weedicide, which is just plant-based, absolutely no harm, no chemicals, plant-based weedicide, and a plant-based nematicide he brought it. So the innovation is he cannot read or write or present in English, but he is the one who has got innovation mind. So this is this exploitation of innovation mind of the farmers with an equal footing is missing in most of these acts, whatever has been done. And registration process, as Kapil Bhai has said, distinctiveness, uniformity, and stability has nothing to do with the farmer varieties. Why the same thing, yardstick should be applied here? So the farmer varieties have a particular trait. And then rather I will also say, where there is a diversity within a variety is the characteristic of a farmer variety. Uniformity is not a character. When there is a diversity, then it is more useful. So this applying the same yardstick for farmer varieties and for the breeder varieties is something which we need to think. And multiple ownership is there, and open source is a better system that has been existing in the farmer varieties, but that's not being respected here. Once you give a certificate, he becomes a owner. If you want to multiply, you have to go to him, take authorization or take permission for multiplication. That's an issue. IP rights given on first come first basis. This is also very ridiculous. If you have, in case of farmer varieties, in case of breeders, it is okay, because that's where some deadline is required. But in case of farmer rights, somebody comes with the first, a company comes with the first and a dubious farmer name and registers it, then they get all the rights, and the communities will lose the rights. That's something which we need to think. And as I already told, that there is a provision in the PPFRA for documentation, indexing, and cataloging of farmer varieties. They have done an excellent job of 17 agrobiodiversity hotspots, clearly done. But the farmer varieties and traditional varieties or land races, database is missing. I think the PPFRA is fully empowered to fund, and particularly through the civil society organizations, for a proper documentation of traditional varieties. Not getting registered, as I told you, 30,000-40,000 rice varieties versus few hundreds registered. And then suppose if the period is over, then what will happen? Then it comes into the open access if they are not registering or reissuing or revalidating their rights. Seed systems is something disowned by the by either the National Biodiversity Authority or the PPFRA. Seed system for farmer varieties is not there. So if it is not there, then who will help them in bringing these varieties through a quality seed system into the access to all the farmers is something missing. These are some of the issues which I perceive. And the institutional framework, if you say PPFRA, there is no provisional for institutional support for conservation or for the custodians. Like if we identify there are 10,000 custodians of the rice varieties, can you give institutional support by linking them to the rice institutes already existing in the development activity, or in using, or in improving? No, there is no provision for that. It mainly is restricted to grant of rights and protecting the rights. And Biological Diversity Act, if you see, state biodiversity boards and the local biodiversity monitoring committees at village level, they are suffering from technical, human, and financial resources. Absolutely, they are suffering, except very few like Uttarakhand and Madhya Pradesh. Uttarakhand is doing extremely well, the state biodiversity board, and they are bringing a lot of money. Seed loss, not oriented to farmer varieties, it is mainly to notified varieties. Community seed banks versus seed repositories. Seed repositories recognized by the National Biodiversity Authority, there are 17 of them. The Botanical Survey of India, NBPGR, NBRI, Forest Research and Education, all of them are recognized for plants, and how much money they spend on that, and what is the institutional framework. Is it available to the farmers, the same institutional framework for conservation, taking them and then bringing them back to the field? And corporate social responsibility also, biodiversity funds are available, but they are very limited and they are not focused. They are based on your contacts, you will get them. And mainstreaming of biodiversity into the entire life of the farmers is a distant vision. It's not happening, though there is some thinking on this. Then public investment.
Can you kindly close in a couple of minutes, Dr. Varun?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah,
Last two slides. Yeah. Farmer varieties, conservation. We have the global conservation like Svalbard, Global Crop Diversity Trust, and several of the gene banks which I told. And if you see the amount of money spent for these ex-situ gene bank conservation, annual maintenance itself is several crores. Like for example, for national NBPGR, last year's annual budget is around 120 crores. And several $100,000 is for the ICRSAT gene bank, which deals with only 5 crops, plus 6 millets, very few crops. Whereas we have a large number of crops, as I told you. Conservation through use is something which is missing. Conservation for the sake of conservation, the banks is different. Conservation through use is different, and where co-evolution is there, that is missing. In formal breeding programs, custodian participation, except for the namesake, participatory breeding is there, but it's a very little impact. But there is a scope to increase the custodians' participation in formal breeding programs. And the benefits are never actually documented. What is the ecological and health benefit that we get by growing the farmer varieties? And the last slide, this is actually the Kavita ji asked me to put it, that the working group on seed systems of revitalizing rainfed area network. We are dealing with these issues, contacting these people for different things like PPV&FR to make the farmer varieties into open source, or to help in the seed systems, and or to document the traditional varieties is another thing which we will approach. And NBPGR, we have approached, and they have in principle agreed to exchange the land races with them, with the farmer networks. Orissa Millet Mission, they are actually agreed to develop an alternative seed system in Orissa for the farmer varieties. And CMSS, they would like to follow up from Andhra Pradesh to Orissa. Pulses and oil seeds are also added in addition to millets in Orissa. And the National Agricultural Science Fund, we have submitted one project, a good project involving almost 94 NGOs. We hope something will happen in that. Department of Agriculture and Cooperation, Seed Village, Joint Secretary Seeds, we talked, Seed Village program, he said that if you submit a proposal, we will agree for the land races. It is not restricted to only released varieties. You submit a proposal through state government or the university, will agree for that. And a database I told you is lacking, which should be taken up. ICR institutes and SAUs, seed and field standards for bringing the farmer varieties is one thing which we are taking up, Indian Institute of Seed Science and some of the universities who are going to do that. And the institutional framework is also missing, which we need to take up, that the knowledge of the farmers, it's not only the material, which should be used even in the formal education. And with this, I conclude that the legal and policy framework, investments, and institutional framework, they need to undergo a radical change to promote the conservation of farmer varieties, which are largely ignored through use both in the farmer fields and in formal breeding programs, by involving custodians to sustain the public health, protecting the ecological assets and environment. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Sorry if I exceeded the time.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Varaprasad. I request all participants to stay on. We'll hear the translation. We'll have 4-5 minutes for Shalini to finish her presentation. And I'm sure the discussion session would be very rich. Please stay on. Ishtiaq, for a gist of the presentation, please.
Sure, Kavita. वरप्रसाद जी ने डॉक्टर वरप्रसाद ने बहुत साफ तौर पे कहा कि कानून के जो कंटेक्स्ट होते हैं उसमें जैसे बदलाव आता है तो परिभाषाएं बदल जाती हैं। तो उन्होंने कहा कि कस्टोडियन किसान दरअसल बीजों के और फसल विविधता के कस्टोडियन हैं और इसमें इस्तेमाल करने वाले संरक्षण प्रमोटर वगैरह तो हैं ही, लेकिन उन्होंने एम्फसाइज किया कि इनोवेटर्स हैं, वो नयापन लाते हैं और उसमें प्रयोग करते हैं। किसानों को के हाथ में नेतृत्व होना चाहिए इस पूरे अभियान में और वैज्ञानिकों को उनकी मदद करनी चाहिए। अभी की स्थिति ये है कि वैज्ञानिक लीड करते हैं और किसानों को जस्ट फॉलो करने को कहा जाता है। वरप्रसाद जी का कहना है कि किसानों को इस मामले में लीड उनके हाथ में रहनी चाहिए। उन्होंने कहा कि भारत फसल विविधता के मामले में बहुत ही संपन्न देश है और इसका पूरा का पूरा श्रेय जो है किसानों को जाता है और उनके पास बहुत सारी क्रॉप डाइवर्सिटी भी है, ज्ञान और कौशल बहुत है किसानों के पास। उन्होंने अंडमान के बारे में बताया कि वहाँ कई ऐसी किस्में हैं फसलों की जो किसानों ने तैयार की हैं जो कि बाकी जगह पे से काफी अलग हैं। उन्होंने इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ आइलैंड एग्रीकल्चर के बारे में बताया जो इन यानी अलग विविध फसलों के पर अध्ययन कर रही हैं। उन्होंने कंजर्वेशन के 3 तरीके बताए, ऑन फार्म जो कि खेतों पे कंजर्वेशन होता है, या फिर फील्ड जीन फार्म्स में, या फिर एक्स सिट्यू में जिसमें सीड बैंक है, इन विट्रो कंजर्वेशन है या क्रायो प्रिजर्वेशन है। उनका कहना है कि ऑन फार्म या जो खेत में ही जो कंजर्वेशन होता है वो सबसे उत्तम है, क्योंकि उसमें अलग अलग यानी विविध फसलों के साथ उनका इंटरैक्शन होता है, इसलिए वो जो वहाँ जो कंजर्वेशन होता है उसकी गुणवत्ता बीजों की और यानी कंजर्वेशन बेहतर क्वालिटी का हो पाता है। फिर उनका कहना है कि जो विभाग हैं जीन और जेनेटिक और बीज के कंजर्वेशन के लिए उनके पास बहुत कम वैरायटीज हैं और किसानों के बीज तो उनके पास बहुत ही कम है और इसको बढ़ाने की जरूरत है। बीज कानून जो है वो केवल नोटिफाइड वैरायटीज के लिए है। बहुत कम किसान पेटेंट करा पाते हैं क्योंकि उसमें खर्चा काफी है, इस वजह से ये किसानों के लिए बहुत मददगार नहीं है। एबीएस गाइडलाइन में अभी एक तो कि वो पूरी तरह से तैयार नहीं है, लागू नहीं है, लेकिन उसमें भी समुदाय के हिस्से की बात नहीं है। और उनका कहना है कि किसान ब्रीडर हैं क्या किसान सिर्फ ब्रीडर हैं या उससे बहुत ज्यादा उनकी भूमिका है। उनका कहना है कि रजिस्ट्रेशन प्रक्रिया जो है अभी की वो भी काफी एक चुनौतीपूर्ण है अभी के हिसाब से। मल्टीपल ओनरशिप, ओपन सोर्स की वो बात कर रहे हैं। फिर उनका कहना है कि आईपीआर में आप पहले आओ पहले पाओ वाला हिसाब किताब है। जो पहले आकर के रजिस्ट्रेशन करा ले तो उसकी वो वैरायटीज हो जाती है। इसकी वजह से जो सही में जो किसान हैं जिन्होंने वो वैरायटी तैयार की है उनके अधिकार मारे जाते हैं। फिर उनका किसानों की बीज वैरायटी का सीड सिस्टम कुछ अभी तक इवॉल्व नहीं हो पाया है हमारे पूरे तंत्र में। किसानों के पास इंस्टीट्यूशनल सपोर्ट नहीं, उनको इंस्टीट्यूशनल सपोर्ट नहीं मिल पा रहा है, इसलिए किसान वर्सेस ब्रीडर या किसान इज इक्वल टू ब्रीडर वाला जो पूरा कंसेप्ट है वो उसको फिर से चुनौती मिलती है। उन्होंने इसको भी हाईलाइट किया है कि बीडीए या एसबीबीज के पास पर्याप्त मात्रा में संसाधन नहीं है। सीएसआर के बारे में उनका कहना है कि बहुत सीमित है और किसानों तक उनकी पहुंच नहीं है। ये कुछ चीजें हम नोट कर पाए थे। धन्यवाद।
थैंक यू। तो कुल मिला के इस कानून में जो अलग अलग डाइकोटमीज है वो भी हाईलाइट किया और ये भी बताया डॉक्टर वरप्रसाद ने कि एक्चुअल ऑन फार्म कंजर्वेशन के लिए ना ये कानून मदद करता है, ना ही कोई स्कीम्स एंड प्रोग्राम्स सरकार से। हम फिर से जाएंगे शालिनी भूटानी के पास। आई होप द ऑडियो वर्क्स। Shalini,
Yes.
thank you for coming back. Please, can we quickly have the remaining slides in about 4 minutes so that we can open this up for discussion?
Right. With
Ajay, Ajay, can you present the slides, please?
With what I've heard so far.
Do you want your presentation or do you want to just...
Yes, okay. Yes, that's fine. With what I've heard so far, I think the key question for farmers and farmer organizations is to decide and address the dilemma on whether they want to participate in this IPR system, whether they want to register their varieties through the PPV&FR Act or not. What has been the experience with those farmers who have already registered? Let me give you a statistic. And this is something that the government always presents and projects to show is as a success indicator that so far, whichever the maximum category of varieties that have been registered are under the category of farmers varieties, about 3,000-4,000 roughly as of August 2020. The minimum number of varieties that have been registered under the new category are by about 50 seed companies, and amongst also by 7 or 8 SAUs and ICAR, IARI, Himachal Pradesh, and Krishi Vigyan, the agriculture universities. So you have a fewer number of varieties under the new category that have been registered, but a large number of farmers varieties that have been invited into this IPR system, not because farmers themselves willingly want to do that, but also through the state system. Krishi Vigyan Kendras, KVKs, have been incentivized to go out, do an outreach program. The authority itself goes out and does awareness programs to bring farmers into the IPR system. But given the experience we've had so far with the implementation of the law, and given the limitations and the limited rights and freedoms that
Ajay, I hope you're on the standby. Maybe you should just patch her in through a regular phone call.
Registered, you get IPR on them, which means that farmers themselves can seek IPR and prevent other farmers from seeking the kind of absolute seed freedoms that they would like. And the issue is that even the varieties that are awarded Plant Genome Savior Awards, the awardees are encouraged to come and register their varieties under the IPR system. So these are fundamental dilemmas on whether we participate in the system, on what terms and conditions do we participate. Could we move to the next slide, please? But how is, apart from the national law and its implementation, there is an emerging international law on peasant seed rights, which I'd like to present before you. Could you please move the slide to the next slide? The International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources already has a very strong Article 9.3, which says that nothing in this article, in this treaty, shall be interpreted to limit any rights that farmers have to save, use, exchange, and sell farm saves seed and they're planting propagating material. But this is made subject to national law. And this is the particular national law for the reference of India. And if it limits farmers' seed freedoms, then can we look at other international law that can be helpful? For instance, there is the international law which was adopted under the United Nations system in 2018, which is called the United Nations Declaration on the Right of Peasants. Within that article, I would urge all farmers groups, particularly seed keepers, to look at Article 19 therein, which makes it very clear that of the absolute freedoms of peasants vis-a-vis their seed systems and their seeds, and actually puts positive obligations on the states to undertake measures to support farmers' seed system. And these obligations are not only to respect, protect, and fulfill the rights, seed rights of peasants, but also to ensure that seed policies, plant variety protection laws, other intellectual property laws, certification schemes, seed marketing laws respect these peasant rights and take into account the lived realities and needs of peasants and other people working in rural areas. So there is international law that has emerged since the last 2-3 years, which I think we must factor in, also as a countervailing force against the pressure that is from the formal seed company to go down the UPOV route. I'll stop here and be happy to take questions. Could you please show the last slide on the international law?
Thanks a lot, Shalini. I think it was very, very apt and useful that you are drawing from the recent UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants. And that was a declaration that was achieved at the international level after a struggle was mounted by groups like the La Via Campesina. Can we close the presentation? Yes. So here we have 4 speakers, where we had Dr. Suman Sahai clearly shared with us the fact that this PPV&FR Act in India was obtained after much struggles. It is not the best of laws that you can ask for, because it's after all set in an IPR framework over seed resources, even where it talks about farmers' rights. But it is something that doesn't exist in other countries. We've seen the story of Gujarat, where we did hear Kapil Bhai talk about how when it came to implementation of even the limited rights that were given in the PPV&FR Act in the name of farmers' rights for farmers as consumers, there was really no proactive protection of those rights, and it was essentially alert citizens and civil society that push back a case mounted by a large company. We've heard from Shalini, and like I just said, she's drawing from a completely new international regime, if you like. India also has signed on to it. This is the UN Declaration on Peasant Rights, where the assertion of farmers' a priori rights, if you like, without many contradictions there, has been quite well embedded. And we did hear from Dr. Varaprasad that farmers as seed conservers and custodians are also having to deal with many dichotomies and dilemmas that got included in the act, unfortunately, and there's really been no public investments in conservation and revival of seed diversity, and that's an integral part of farmer seed rights. Unless there's diversity physically present there, what is the point in talking about seed rights? We now open this up for a discussion, and there have been quite a few questions that had come in, and I will begin with something which seems very general, but I'm sure Dr. Suman Sahai has, sharp responses to this. So there's this question at the end of 4 presentations. How do we actually protect farmers' seed rights? Dr. Suman Sahai? You have to unmute, yes.
How do we protect? By being vigilant and being insistent that we will not let go of these rights. And being insistent can include protests, must include protests. Because all of the people, and there are many people here and many people outside of this group, who have contributed a lot to the evolution of farmers' rights, both nationally and globally. And how do we protect them? By being persistent, by being vigilant.
Okay. Kapil Bhai, a question to you. How harsh or clear are the Indian laws when farmers' rights are compromised? You've seen the PepsiCo issue where there's been a clear compromise in a sense. What's your response?
Again, please. How?
How harsh, how, I mean, on behalf of farmers, how protective have they been? It's a bit of a repetition of what you said, but maybe once again.
I'm not able to follow the question, sir. Please.
Getting here, I mean, to what extent does the legislative framework protect the rights of farmers? How capable is it to protect the rights of farmers?
When farmers' rights are getting compromised, is this law useful at all?
See, the law needs to be well clarified and FAQ. Even the recent FAQ, there one can find many problems with the recent FAQ which they have published after withdrawing another FAQ. And they say that this is not for a legal purpose. Also, what is worrisome is, as I said, that authority which is meant for protecting the farmers' right have never come up proactively in the whole case. So it is really worrisome. And only thing I say, farmers leaders, farm organizations, and all remain vigilant. What is happening backdoor, behind the door, is the only way to correct the whole system. Laws are many, which could be said it is for the farmers, for the citizens, but how it is implemented finally is important. And secondly, mass awareness at all level is very important to implement this farmers' right.
Right. Shalini, a question to you. There's been some talk about creation of people's biodiversity registers. The Biological Diversity Act also talks about documentation at the local level, from local to national level. Do you think this is a good way to counter IPRs on farmers' varieties? What are your thoughts on this?
I've been tracking the Biological Diversity Act for several years now. And what was most surprising is that quite recently, under the PPV&FR Act, it is biodiversity management committees, BMCs themselves, that are seeking plant variety protection or seeking IPR. As originally thought of and conceived under the National Biological Diversity Act, biodiversity management committees to be set up in every local body was supposed to document the local folk varieties, seeds, breeds, etc., and local people's knowledge. But that those spaces for decentralized decision making on your local biological resources would also become venues to seek IPR really tells how the story has gone. But the reality also is that state biodiversity boards and have very limited resources, and they will need to work a lot with the line departments in the different state governments to provide a collaborative platform and an ecosystem, just like the forces and the powers that we come together to support the seed industry. So, these two systems are juxtaposed against each other. The formal seed system is drawing from the informal seed system, but they're not getting equal support. And that's, I think, part of what the campaign and the advocacy work becomes critical with groups like Asha and others. But I also would like to go back to the whole articulation of what is farmers' rights. Who articulates that, and how is that articulated? Are we going to limit ourselves in India to an articulation and a definition of farmers' rights, which is limited in an IPR law, rather than looking at wider, more holistic farmers' rights? These are very limited seed freedoms or seed privileges, not even absolute rights. These are seed privileges uh, which are given vis-a-vis IPR protected varieties. But I think India, particularly, is one of the key countries which is also leading and the international process on the implementation of farmers' rights under the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources. Next year, the Government of India, Ministry of Agriculture, is going to host the next governing body meeting of a farmers' rights implementation group in India in December next year. And we should be using this time uh, to articulating what we see holistically as farmers' rights, not simply farmers' varieties, plant variety certificate, but the entire ecosystem of support. And what does that mean? Access to not only planting material and genetic material, but like you said, assured access to land, water, the kind of marketing support, supporting farmers, seed markets, etc. You have to look at the whole pipeline just as it's being constructed and supported in their formal seed system. Which brings me to a very crucial aspect of how farmers' rights are defined in the international treaty. It's not simply about traditional knowledge or farmer seed freedom. It also is the right to participate in making decisions at the national level on matters that affect farmers. And so it's also very much a process issue. So I think those wider articulations need to be put out much more often.
Right. And while you're articulating that, we are also walking into negotiating free trade agreements where we are, giving away all these little spaces that remain. I have a question to Dr. Varaprasad. And I don't mean to ask you this question just because you're from the ICAR system, but because I know that you look at these things objectively. There's a question that says that universities are influenced by seed companies who give various projects and therefore fund support to the NARS entities. Do we really hope for indigenous seeds to be protected there, to actually thrive there? And there have been instances where, such universities have sought to, actively lay claim on what farmers have bred. The HMT seed story of Dadabai Khobragade, or the question here is talking about a red bhindi variety, which IIVR is claiming as its own, whereas it's a traditional variety. Do you have any thoughts on this, Dr. Varaprasad?
Yeah, I think the first contradiction is that the entire national agricultural system started working on not on commercial basis, but on public need basis. Commercialization came only last 10 years or 15 years. Earlier, it was the knowledge to be developed for the sake of farmers and give it. But another very important issue that's also needs to be relooked is that the National Biodiversity Authority or Biological Diversity Act does not restrict any Indian, includes private companies, any Indian collecting material for research purpose in India, absolutely no prior approval is required. And as I know, for the last 30, 40 years when I worked in the system, the public servants particularly, they just walk into any farmer's field, collect whatever they like, and then they bring it back. And there was no question of commercialization earlier. It was just a step towards a service to farmers. Now, having come to this, there is absolutely no documentation of what is collected for research. Actually, there are two angles. One is the collection by a private company. Certainly, the intention is to commercialize it, because your objective of the private company is to commercialization. They are extremely friendly. Anybody going with a vehicle and with a good dress, they not only give their material, they also give a coffee or buttermilk. So without, maybe not everywhere, but mostly it is the case. Mostly it is the case. But nowhere it is recorded. So that's the reason why these kind of, now in this context, present IPR context, they become relevant to ask, how can you claim the farmer variety? Like, I can list n number of varieties which were actually, particularly in the vegetables, most of them are actually nothing done except purification and release. And most of the fruits, purification and release. It was the case 1960s varieties, most of them are also just collected, purified and released. There is no hybrid or crossing are involved. So all of them actually belong to farmer varieties. But as long as you are not making money and putting in the public domain, it was all right. It was not questioned. But now it has to be questioned. Thank you.
May I add,
just 1 second, Shalini. I hear you talking about a mechanism where we track people collecting, but it's easy enough to cheat at the collection stage and say that you don't belong to any company, right? So any individual can go and do it and later on give it to a company, for instance. Is it really, is it possible to set up foolproof systems around something like that?
It is possible, but what we need to think is 80% of the people are honest. If there is a system, people will follow. There will be only 20% who will are dishonest, and there will be a problem. But right now, what I am saying is there is no system,
right?
No provision.
Okay, thank you, Shalini.
Yes, I just like to flag that groups that are considering registering their varieties under the category of farmers' varieties need to be aware that there are limits to how long you can continue to register varieties under this system. It's limited by time, because the farmer's variety is an example of an extant variety or an existing variety, which is time bound. Though the varieties that are allowed, 160 odd, which are allowed to be registered, are registrable with the DUS criteria. There is a time limit that is prescribed. You cannot endlessly go on registering farmers' varieties. Secondly, according to a circular that has been issued by the authority last month, now any application for registration of a farmer's variety has to be accompanied by a mandatory certificate from an SAU, from a Central Agriculture University, ICAR or CSIR, under whichever jurisdiction they come under. And the only pure seed which is produced will be accepted along with the verification certificate. So it's not so easy to even register a farmer's variety, even though it is said that there will be no fees charged for farmer's variety. Right. I think as a matter of information, it's also important to know that there is a process of amendment of the Act, which is also underway. The seed industry has been making its submissions to the government. And I think groups here who are involved in the seed work should also put forward their submissions vis-a-vis the issues that they flag around the PPV&FR Act.
Right, thanks. Sumanji, there's a question to you. You know, many seed savers and seed conservation groups have decided against registering varieties that they are conserving with the authority, because they understand that there is, I mean, there are several issues there. They don't want any exclusive rights and so on. But they are also keen on preventing biopiracy. In the first instance, they have sought that registration mainly to establish prior art. In such a situation, when they don't want to register there, but they're also worried about somebody else getting IPRs elsewhere, if not in India, what should they do? Any practical mechanisms?
I think the question of registration is important to stake claim. And therefore, I would say that farmer varieties should be registered. As far as excluding other farmers, it's up to you. You can register and make it available. There are, even in the Patent Act, there are clauses which say that I have exclusive ownership, but I waive this ownership for such and such category of people. And therefore, the registration under farm varieties, you can use the same clause, that you do not restrict or prohibit farmers, other farmers, from using it. Depends on you, depends on how you want to do it. So I think that registration is important, because otherwise it is an open season. There is no claim to ownership exercised by anyone. And even our Biodiversity Act does not really exercise ownership over biodiversity, which is something that is not desirable. But even if it were, it doesn't exist. To make sure that these varieties are not pirated, there has to be somewhere a kind of paper that says this belongs to XY. And only then can you take legal action, because then it is a violation of the ownership of XY. Coming back, I think registration should be done.
Yeah, just that in the implementation regime that has been built, authorization is required, and this is something that we are discovering. You know, some state governments are ready to bring farmers' varieties into the formal seed supply systems of multiplying and distributing. But authorization from those individual farmers and so on has become an inbuilt system. Dr. Varaprasad, this is a question to you. The existing NBPGR passport data and so on, how easy or difficult is it to be used to prevent biopiracy rather than look at registration in the authority as a tool for preventing biopiracy?
Actually, NBPGR gene bank data is not legally actually protected by any law. So it is actually collected by the scientists and put it in a passport data form in the gene bank database. And so that is why I agree with Dr. Suman that registration of farmer varieties is an important act, particularly to protect the nation's interests. But there was also a thinking that why not? The first thing, lacuna is we don't have a database of traditional varieties. So whatever is protected, I gave you one crop example where we have at least 30 or 40,000 varieties, maybe out of that 20,000 only from Chhattisgarh, grown around 30 years back, but registered is only 700 or 800 maximum in the PPV&FR Act registration. So what will happen to the all remaining traditional varieties that were being cultivated for one trait or for some advantage? So the first objective, even to protect nation's interest, is to document it, all the varieties that we have with the farmers. Right now, whether it is cultivated or earlier cultivated, some seed is available. That kind of documentation is important.
I agree. Shalini, a question to you. Are there any instances of benefit sharing that have happened under this act?
No, the authority was trying to negotiate on behalf of farmers to be able to strike a deal with the private company, but there's nothing that has really emerged. So, and that's a big issue. If you have several farmers' varieties that are registered and the ABS system is not working, then the promised benefits do not accrue to the contributing communities, farmer communities, which has put forward that knowledge and that planting material into the system. And that's not a problem particular to the PPV&FR Act. There are issues about access and benefit sharing even in the Biological Diversity Act. The industry itself, whether it's the pharmaceutical industry or the seed industry, have been fighting any ABS obligations tooth and nail, even through litigation in courts in India.
Right.
Just a very short intervention.
Yes, yes, Sumanji.
The fact is also that the seed industry hesitates to use farmer varieties. They don't want to get into that whole thing for two reasons. One, there's too much groundwork to be done to try and breed that up into another variety. Much easier to take a public sector variety, an extant variety, which is much better described, and then plant their gene on that and make it into a new variety.
Yeah. Kapil Bhai, I'll club two questions for you, and this is probably the last question that we'll take. Are there any associations that are there just for farmers' seed rights in India? Can you share some information on that? And secondly, the farmers that were sued in Gujarat by PepsiCo, were they doing contract farming with PepsiCo? Or were they farmers, potato farmers who had nothing to do with PepsiCo? Quickly, if you can respond to both.
At least for these two reasons, for these farmers, they had nothing to do with PepsiCo, and we realized that in the name of contract farming, it was just verbal, and we didn't find any paper, not from this farmer, from any other farmer, that there was really a contract farming document ever signed with the potato farmers by any of the companies. This is the reality. And even though the companies are claiming in the reports that they are doing great service to contract farming, in fact, in legal terms, there is no contract at all. This is the reality. Now, situation might have changed. Secondly, there are many groups in India which are working for farmers' rights, no doubt about it. But basically, they are more working for conservation and I would say a kind of a network building, giving them a kind of a market access, the consumer awareness kind of thing for their various nutrition and other traits, or the abilities for the consumers' health kind of thing. But as far as for the protection of rights, helping them to protect their rights, very few organizations we have come across. We need to build a good strength over it. Thank you.
Aruna Rodriguez is reminding that there was a message that she typed out, and I remember typing it out for Dr. Varaprasad, and that's related to GM seeds. Dr. Varaprasad, you would have seen the question, right?
Yeah. I've seen.
Can you respond to that?
Yes, actually, as of now, transgenic crop release is not allowed in India. Actually, it is not being done. No transgenic crop or GMO is now done in India. So, but it does not mean that the whole technique of the marker-assisted selection or using markers for different things or selection of varieties, we should not use the technology. And then recently, as you know, that CRISPR-Cas technology has come, where you don't bring foreign genes, but the existing natural genes are cut and used. And for that, already the DBT has put up, the last date is over, but they are bringing with some policy for CRISPR-Cas technologies. So I do not know what kind of safety data they will develop. But as of now, in food crops, definitely GMOs, in my opinion, is not a good move to go ahead.
Yeah, Dr. Varaprasad, just to correct you a bit, there are quite a few GMOs in the pipeline, including illegal plantings that have happened, other than ones which are going through the regulatory pipeline. And we also have been writing to the regulators that gene editing is not different from the kind of genetic engineering techniques that we've seen in the past, that it falls under the ambit of gene technologies that is already contained in the Environment Protection Act's 1989 rules, whereas the DBT draft guidelines actually try to look at only the end product and forget about processes of genome editing for regulation. But that's a different debate that we can have. We did have a training session, incidentally, which was not a webinar, on genome editing, because most people still are not familiar with it. I would like to end the webinar here, first by thanking all our excellent panelists, Dr. Suman Sahai, Shalini Bhutani, Dr. Varaprasad, and Kapil Bhai Shah. We, of course, missed the participation and presence of Dr. Agrawal, who right now is not with the authority. He is the DDG for Education in ICAR, but has been the only Registrar General for farmers' varieties in the authority from the time it's been instituted. Thank you all so much for your excellent presentations and participation, and for really educating all of us. I'd like to thank Ishtiaq Ahmed for the translations that he does in all webinars, including in this one. It's a huge challenge that he takes on willingly and happily. Thanks a ton for the translation support that you lent here, Ishtiaq. I'd like to thank the entire technical support team consisting of Rohit Parak, Ajay Tikala, Harsha, Vinyasa, Naveen Ramisetti, and many others. Pardon me for forgetting some names. Thank you so much for being there in all webinars. And for all those who've been sending messages again and again, saying, are these recordings available? Are the presentations available? The presentations are available on kisanswaraj.in website. The videos that are live streaming right now from this webinar are on several social media pages, including the Asha Kisan Swaraj Facebook page, the Raitu Swarajya Vedika Facebook page, the Twitter handle of Asha, and so on. And I request our speakers to kindly entertain some questions that have remained unanswered. I thought they were not directly relevant to the legal issues that we were discussing around farmer seed rights. They were related to participatory plant breeding, better conservation on farm, and so on. And you're all experts in that. Allow us to send those questions onward to you, and kindly humor us by responding as much as you can. We'll put it up on our webpage. We'll end this webinar here. Thank you all so much. I do want to share that our next webinar is on November 7th. It is on sustainable solutions to straw burning problem. And this comes at a time when the center has once again brought in an ordinance, and it does happen to be a potentially draconian ordinance where farmers are being made the culprits for the air pollution problem in Delhi, rather than being looked at as victims. The ordinance doesn't focus only on agriculture stubble burning, but in its references makes it look as though the Delhi air pollution problem is predominantly related to straw burning in agriculture. And there are solutions to this. Let us look at this on Saturday, 7th November at 3:30 p.m. We hope you will be there. Thank you so much once again. Much thanks to all of you.